During the blazing heat of 1943's summer months, the terrain around Kursk became the stage for an unprecedented military confrontation. This wasn't simply another engagement. It represented an enormous wager in warfare's most lethal theatre, where entire countries hung in the balance and armoured vehicles served as the game pieces. When the spring of 1943 arrived, Hitler's forces wrestled with a tangle of strategic challenges, each one increasingly urgent. The devastating loss at Stalingrad during the cold months of 1942 into 43 had wounded German forces, shattering their reputation for being unbeatable. The Soviet forces, strengthened by their triumph, initiated multiple attacks, driving the Wehrmacht backward throughout the expansive theatre of war. At the same time, Allied forces had secured solid positions in the African campaign, and continuous aerial strikes were pulverizing cities throughout Germany and disrupting production capacity. Under these circumstances, Führer desperately sought to seize back control. The Wehrmacht leadership, staggered by recent failures, argued between adopting defensive positions or attempting another major attack. The dictator, fixated on his faith in Germanic military prowess and advanced weaponry now available, selected the aggressive option. The objective became the Kursk projection, a bulge stretching 150 miles into Wehrmacht territory where Russian troops had strengthened their defenses, clearly anticipating German moves. The Führer calculated that a powerful, focused strike at this location might surround and eliminate substantial Soviet fighting capability, securing the Eastern Theatre and returning strategic advantage to the Reich. This choice resulted in postponing the attack originally scheduled for springtime to permit manufacturing and fielding of advanced equipment, such as the impressive Tiger and recently unveiled Panther armoured vehicles. The delay carried significant consequences. Soviet espionage and observation discovered Wehrmacht plans, and the Russian military exploited these additional weeks to strengthen the Kursk bulge with multiple defensive lines, explosive barriers, and gun emplacements. When fighting finally began, Soviet forces had created an imposing defensive arrangement meant to exhaust the aggressors in a grinding conflict, for which German planners were ill-equipped. The Wehrmacht called their scheme Operation Citadel. The strategy involved a pincer maneuver, with Model's army attacking from northern positions and Hoth's armoured force from southern approaches seeking to trap Russian forces inside the projection. The accumulation of forces was staggering. Wehrmacht forces gathered around 780,000 to 800,000 troops, approximately 2,700 to 2,900 armoured fighting vehicles, nearly 10,000 artillery pieces and heavy weapons, and about 2,000 warplanes. Countering this, Soviet forces deployed roughly 1.9 million troops, close to 5,000 armoured vehicles, above 20,000 artillery pieces and heavy weapons, and more than 2,400 aircraft, demonstrating their enhanced manufacturing and manpower reserves. The strategic paralysis that prompted the attack on Kursk originated from Wehrmacht errors and a continuing failure to properly assess Soviet strength and determination. The leadership hierarchy, filled with contradictory approaches and hampered by the dictator's more and more unpredictable commands, confronted a Russian army gaining in assurance and competence. Soviet forces had not merely endured the savage attacks of the conflict's opening years. They had adjusted, evolved, and transformed into a superior combat organization. With preparations complete and strategies finalized, Wehrmacht forces readied themselves for what would be called the Battle of Kursk, a choice laden with serious consequences. As soldiers took their positions during nighttime hours, the atmosphere was heavy with expectation and the strong smell of fuel and grit. The approaching engagement was not just a trial of strength, but a critical turning point in the conflict. A juncture that would either revive Wehrmacht progress in the east or signal the start of an unstoppable Soviet advance toward Germany. On the 5th of July 1943, German forces launched Operation Citadel with an intensity that rattled the Eastern Theatre. Committing almost 800,000 troops, about 2,700 armoured vehicles, and roughly 10,000 artillery pieces, Wehrmacht forces began a two-pronged attack designed to surround and annihilate Russian forces in the Bulge. The Southern Arm, commanded under Field Marshal von Manstein's Southern Army formation, focused on Hoth's armoured army. The Northern Arm was controlled by General Walter Model's forces under the Central Army grouping. Dawn arrived with the thunder of motors and guns as Wehrmacht forces tried rapid, mechanized attacks echoing their early conflict victories. At first, German forces achieved notable penetration. In the southern sector, Manstein's units pushed forward up to 12 kilometers on day one, piercing Russian initial defensive zones. Armored formations, led partly by newly deployed Panthers and backed by Tigers, drove into the outer defensive layers. Yet equipment failures and thick minefields rapidly drained attacking power. In the northern sector, Model's troops encountered even stronger opposition, yet managed to advance, dealing heavy casualties to the Soviet defensive army. German air power delivered vital assistance, hampering Russian reinforcement and command networks. The aerial battle was intensely fought. However, Russian forces under Marshal Zhukov had organized thoroughly. The breadth and sophistication of defensive structures were beyond anything Wehrmacht forces had faced. Several defensive layers, packed with obstacles, explosive fields, and strengthened sites, stretching across multiple tens of kilometers in primary areas, and supported by additional defensive lines and reserves. The Soviets also maintained a large reserve, featuring thousands of tanks and massive artillery, prepared to deploy at key moments. As the engagement continued, the opening German advances stalled against determined resistance. Initial battlefield successes couldn't be transformed into a rupture. In the northern area, the main obstacles were thick explosive fields, anti-armor positions, and strategically placed artillery, which trapped mechanized forces and eliminated operational flexibility. The Russian air arm, despite suffering significant losses, conducted continuous missions that contested German aerial assistance and attacked logistics routes. The ferocity of the Soviet counteraction was demonstrated at Prokhorovka, where one of warfare's biggest armored battles occurred on the 12th of July. At that location, the Soviet Guards tank army clashed with the elite SS Armored Corps in a huge, confused engagement involving roughly 900 to 1,300 armored vehicles. Despite enduring terrible casualties, Russian forces stopped the premier German units and prevented the operational rupture required to prevail in the battle. Prokhorovka demonstrated the enhanced methods and toughness of the Red Army developed through bitter experience against Wehrmacht forces. Meanwhile, the immense extent of Soviet readiness shocked German leadership. Reconnaissance shortcomings and undervaluing of Russian capability generated serious miscalculations. Wehrmacht's supply systems, already overstretched by previous campaigns, couldn't match the requirements of ongoing, intense combat. Ammunition and fuel scarcities started to manifest, and the combined impact of explosive barriers, artillery, and defensive strikes consistently diminished attacking capability. In summary, while Operation Citadel began with a forceful assault, Russian determination and readiness, joined with the severe constraints of geography, fortifications, and supply systems, progressively weakened German operational strength. What had been planned as a rapid, conclusive strike became an expensive, grinding battle, signifying a crucial transformation in the Eastern theatre. Failing to accomplish their strategic aims, Wehrmacht forces faced a resolute, revitalized opponent, creating conditions for continuous Soviet attacks that would drive toward the German capital. Right when a Wehrmacht rupture appeared achievable, the Red Army revealed its methodically planned, defensive responses. Recognizing the engagement's critical character, Soviet forces had scattered the Catalan routes with explosives, anti-armor obstacles, and widespread wire barriers, specifically created to drain mechanized momentum. This stratified depth blunted the assault. Wehrmacht units under Model and Hoth discovered themselves stuck in exhausting attritional conflict, distant from rapid encirclements. As the Catalan armored formations struggled against strengthened positions, the Red Army committed reserves with accuracy. Marshal Zhukov and General Rokossovsky had accumulated a substantial reserve of fresh formations. Withheld until the crucial instant, these reinforcements were deployed in counterattacks commencing in the middle of July 1943. The effect was instant. Wehrmacht formations, exhausted by continuous fighting and supply difficulties, were poorly positioned to resist new Russian armored and infantry offensives. Allied material assistance strengthened this advantage. Most significantly, the hundreds of thousands of transport vehicles provided throughout the conflict substantially enhanced Soviet operational movement and logistics across the enormous theatre. Additionally, reconnaissance information from Allied channels, combined with Soviet intelligence, enabled the High Command to predict Wehrmacht actions and mass strength at critical locations. The widespread T-34, deployed in vast quantities with its angled protection and 76.2mm cannon, stayed a foundation of Russian armored power and proved effective against Panthers and Tigers when employed in large numbers and with integrated artillery assistance. Continuous Soviet bombardments, coordinated with increasing expertise, pounded Wehrmacht formations, gradually destroying their organization. With German units staggering, conditions were established for a critical reversal. The Soviet Air Force, more seasoned and better supplied than in 1941 through 42, progressively challenged the airspace and limited the Luftwaffe's capacity to influence the ground engagement. Distributed across several theatres, German aviation units could no longer ensure the massed assistance their ground troops required. By late July, Wehrmacht command acknowledged the pointlessness of continuing Citadel. The dictator terminated the operation following the Allied invasion of Sicily and the increasing Soviet pressure. The Red Army didn't pause. Rather, it exploited its edge with following operations throughout a wide area. Urban centers and regions lost previously were recaptured sequentially. The change in advantage was permanent. Kursk not only signified a pivotal moment in the Eastern campaign, it announced the deterioration of Wehrmacht military prospects. German forces' reputation of being unbeatable was destroyed, and the Red Army's assurance increased, establishing conditions for the extended advance to the German capital. As the smoke cleared on the landscape of Kursk, it was evident that the Soviet Union had not just weathered the attack, it had evolved, adjusted, and came out more powerful. Strategic skill, vital Allied assistance, and strong industrial capacity merged to reverse the situation dramatically against the Axis in the Eastern Theatre. The Battle of Kursk remains evidence of the determination and persistence of Soviet troops, whose triumph established the groundwork for Nazi Germany's final defeat. As the devastated terrain fell silent, the explanations for Wehrmacht failure became clear. Kursk represented a crucial juncture in World War II and a watershed in contemporary operational theory. Operation Citadel, an effort to surround and destroy Soviet forces in the projection, depended on the premise that a quick, massed strike could reclaim the advantage. Instead, a mixture of errors, overextended logistics, and imposing defences created failure. The initial and possibly most vital strategic mistake was the postponement. First scheduled for May 1943, the operation moved to July. That deferment provided the Red Army time to construct deep, stratified defences spanning dozens of kilometres in the crucial areas filled with explosive fields, anti-armour barriers, and reinforced structures intended to disrupt and destroy armoured advances. When Wehrmacht forces ultimately struck, they encountered not an unprepared foe, but one of the most impressive defensive arrangements yet constructed. Operationally, Wehrmacht forces undervalued Soviet ability and toughness. By the middle of 1943, the Red Army had expanded in scale and markedly enhanced its battlefield and operational skill under the strain of continual large-scale battles. The sustained mass deployment of T-34s and the well-timed employment of properly equipped reserves fulfilled vital functions in stopping the attack. Wehrmacht intelligence didn't adequately recognize these changes, encouraging excessive confidence. German aerial dominance, so critical earlier in the conflict, was progressively challenged. The Soviet Air Force, gaining from superior aircraft and more veteran aviators, battled the Luftwaffe constantly. This aerial conflict exhausted German assets and diminished the impact of ground assistance, shifting the situation further from a conclusive Wehrmacht advantage. The casualty toll also carried deep, lasting impacts. Wehrmacht losses were substantial, and the depletion of experienced soldiers and vital armoured assets diminished their capacity to conduct subsequent attacks. Mentally, the loss at Kursk destroyed the perception of invincibility. In the consequences, Kursk revealed the boundaries of rapid penetration, methods against a thoroughly prepared, resolute enemy. It transferred the strategic advantage to the Soviets. From this juncture onward, the Red Army moved conclusively to attacking operations, recovering occupied land and forcing the Germans backward throughout a wide area. The implications reached well past the combat zone. Kursk signified the commencement of a maintained Soviet push that would ultimately reach to the center of the German capital. The loss substantially exhausted Wehrmacht capability and spirit, hastening Allied victories on every theatre. As scholars and warfare experts reflect back, Kursk remains as a vital instruction in the principles of combat, demonstrating the results of undervaluing an adversary's ability to evolve, adjust, and strengthen under duress. This engagement not only transformed the Eastern Front, it helped reshape the routes to triumph in the Second World War. The Battle of Kursk remains as a significant demonstration of the boundaries of combat capability and the steadfast character of opposition. It was not just a battle, but an instruction in the principles of conflict, planning, and human perseverance. If you found this account valuable, subscribe for additional World War II content. Thanks for watching.